Senator Blumenthal, I cannot believe that you would accuse me of impropriety when you lied about your military service.
I am
you
not
lied.
asking
You
you.
admitted you
I am
lied
not
to be
accusing you
elected
of
a U.S. senator.
impropriety.
Do not question my ability to be fair and impartial as Attorney General.
Just wanted to note for the record, the Paramount merger that he referenced was not within the Department of Justice's ambit. That was at the FCC, not the Department of Justice.
Blumenthal came prepared with facts, records, and a clear through line, questioning whether the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi had become an arm of the Trump White House. His questions weren't random. They cut straight to the foundation of democracy, whether our justice system can still operate independently from political influence.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just so the American people understand, this issue of weaponization of justice goes to the core of the integrity of our criminal justice system. And I think we can all agree that no individual, no group should be targeted simply because they are a political opponent or because the President of the United States has some personal animosity toward them. You've just said that President Trump is the most transparent president in history. Tragically and chillingly, you may be right when it comes to criminal justice, because far from ending weaponization of justice, I would submit, Madam Attorney General, that President Trump has embodied it. And we have a record. It is a public record of his express instructions that certain individuals be investigated. The Attorney General of New York, Tish James, my colleague Adam Schiff, the former CISA director, Chris Krebs, the DHS former Chief of Staff, Miles Taylor. There's a list. And he has been transparent. In fact, 5 days before the indictment of James Comey, he put this post up as instructions to you. He didn't mince words. He was very open and public that you should indict James Comey and others because they are guilty as hell. No more delay. Now, 5 days before you indicted, or grand jury at your instructions indicted James Comey. I'd like to know from you what conversations you've had with President Trump about the indictment of James Comey.
Senator, I am not going to discuss any conversations I have or have not had with the President of the United
you
States.
See that
You're
post?
an attorney, you have a law degree, and you know that I'm not going to do that. I also find it fascinating, because I'll keep fighting to ensure that law enforcement and the judicial process move forward without political interference. No one is above the law, not even the President. That's a quote from you, Senator Blumenthal. In 2017.
Well, let me ask you then, when you saw that
No
post,
one is above the law. That was your quote.
When you saw that post, did you talk to anybody in the White House?
I am not going to discuss any conversations I have, nor any investigations,
So
nor
you are unwilling
any
to tell
pending
this committee
cases.
about conversations with the White House
And if I may
regarding James
continue,
Comey's indictment.
and if I may
Let me
continue,
show you a picture.
James Comey was indicted by one of the most liberal grand juries in the United States.
The night before James Comey's indictment, you had dinner with the President of the United States. Pretty intimate group.
Actually, there were a lot of people there that night. That's a great
James
picture.
Comey discussed at that dinner?
I love that picture. That's a great picture. And there were a lot of people there that night. I think the entire cabinet was there.
Did you discuss James Comey with the President of the United States? He was sitting just to your left.
Well, 2 seats down, yes. 2 seats down. And I am not going to discuss any conversations I've had or not have with the President of the United
Because the American public
States.
is entitled to know, Madam Attorney General.
The entire cabinet was at that dinner,
whether
too,
you took
Senator.
instructions from President Trump after he told you very directly to indict James Comey, which is weaponization of the Department of Justice. I want to agree with my colleague, Senator Hawley, that weaponization of our justice system must end. That's the reason that I propose legislation, and I challenge him and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join me in legislation that would create a statutory right of action for people who are selectively or maliciously prosecuted for political reasons. It would codify your manual, the Department of Justice manual, on political prohibitions against political considerations in charging decisions, and prohibit the White House from intervening, President Trump and any other president from intervening in charging decisions. It would make reforms to the grand jury process. You've just said this grand jury was liberal. We should reform the grand jury process to ensure that the government is not abusing its power and authority, and it will require transparency and accountability reforms at DOJ so that you will and other attorneys general be held accountable for these kinds of decisions. Will you join me in supporting that kind of reform?
Senator Blumenthal, I find it so interesting that you didn't bring any of this up during President Biden's administration when he was doing everything to protect Hunter Biden, his son. And I think you just saw what Director Radcliffe just released.
You know, this is an effort to be positive.
If I can finish answering the question, I'm not going to yell over you. I'm not going to get in the gutter with you. But information that the Biden administration told them not to investigate Hunter Biden's involvement with Ukraine. I'm not going to be lectured to you about integrity by someone who lied about being in the military just to be elected a senator.
The merger between Hewlett-Packard Enterprises and Juniper Network was settled. You authorized the settlement. It was the subject of a lawsuit to block it. The settlement produced virtually no concessions from Hewlett-Packard. It was a settlement that prompted criticism from the Antitrust Division. Did you authorize that settlement yourself?
As I stated earlier, Gail Slater is doing an incredible job running the antitrust unit. And as I stated earlier, that is still a pending matter. As you should know with a law degree,
did you not
that all mergers, if I can finish answering the question.
I'm going to,
if I could finish, no, I'm answering the question.
Because my time is limited.
No, well then don't ask me a question. So,
let me just ask you,
I said, you have a law degree. You know that not only are mergers agreed upon, but they have to go to a court of law to be approved. It's a multi-step process. And as I said earlier, that is still pending. And I have full faith in Gail Slater.
And Ms. Slater reportedly objected to the settlement.
Reportedly.
And moreover, two of her top officials were fired, Roger Alford and Bill Sinner. Did you authorize and direct those firings after they objected to the settlement?
I am not going to discuss personnel matters or pending litigation in my office.
Let me ask you about another merger. The merger involving two home health care agencies on favorable terms, likely to drive up costs for millions of America. The Transportation Department's rule to provide compensation to travelers impacted by airline-caused flight delays, which was canceled. The merger of Skydance and Paramount, after Paramount's ownership took a number of steps favorable to the president. These kinds of mergers belie the claims that President Trump himself has made, that this administration will stop big corporate mergers that ultimately benefit the owners of those corporations rather than consumers or ordinary, everyday Americans.
Senator,
let me ask you
about
you
just listed, you just gave a list of many mergers.
I have a question
Can you talk to me about the issue with these mergers?
I do have a question. In the merger that took place,
which merger? You've listed many.
Involving American Express GBT. I understand that Brian Ballard, longtime backer and head of the law firm where you worked, was instrumental in lobbying the Justice Department to drop that lawsuit. It was dismissed, so it's not subject to a court review. What conversation did you have with Mr. Ballard?
Senator Blumenthal, I cannot believe that you would accuse me of impropriety when you lied about your military service.
I am
you
not
lied.
asking
You
you.
admitted you
I am
lied
not
to be
accusing you
elected
of
a U.S. senator.
impropriety.
You
I'm asking
lied.
you
How
about
dare you? I'm a
conversations
career prosecutor.
with
Don't
Mr.
you
Ballard,
ever challenge my integrity.
had
I have
apparently-
abided by every ethics standard. Do not question my ability to be fair and impartial as Attorney General, and anything
You'll
with
answer that
my
question to
former
another of my
firm,
colleagues.
Ballard Partners.
Thank you.
Senator Lee has asked for the chair.
Yeah, just wanted to note for the record, the Paramount merger that he referenced was not within the Department of Justice's ambit. That was at the FCC, not the Department of Justice. Attorney General Bondi would have had nothing to do with that. Thanks.
And that was why I asked Senator Lee.
What just happened between Senator Blumenthal and Attorney General Bondi is more than a heated exchange. It's a lesson on how fragile the institutions that protect our rights actually are, and how quickly norms can be hollowed out if nobody pushes back. Blumenthal opened where every careful lawyer and public servant should start, with the concept of weaponization. That's not a sidebar issue. It's the core question of whether our criminal justice system works for facts and the law or for whoever holds power. He laid out a pattern: sudden firings of career prosecutors, investigations dropped in confusing circumstances, and high-profile actions that follow social media posts from the commander-in-chief. Taken together, those are not isolated accidents. They look like a change in how the DOJ decides what counts as a crime and who gets investigated. Listen to the sequence. A president publicly calls for an indictment, and days later, an indictment appears. A top immigration official is filmed taking cash in a way that looks blatantly corrupt, and the investigation quietly stalls. Veteran prosecutors with decades of experience are pushed out or resign rather than follow orders they consider improper. Those are the facts Blumenthal is forcing us to reckon with. He's not making partisan noise. He's asking whether the institution that enforces the law has been repurposed to protect friends and punish critics. Bondi's responses, evasions, deflections to Hunter Biden or protests, and personal attacks matter as much as the underlying allegations. When an attorney general refuses to answer direct questions about communications with the White House or about whether an investigation was pursued, that silence is a form of political messaging. It tells the public we will not be transparent when it might hurt the powerful. It also signals to career staff that political loyalty is now a more valuable credential than prosecutorial judgment. This is where we need to be precise about the stakes. A democracy doesn't crumble in a single dramatic day. It erodes as processes are bent, precedents drift, and officials normalize evasions. Imagine two consequences playing out simultaneously. First, immediate harms. If corrupt behavior is not investigated and punished, the corrupt benefit. Contracts are steered, regulations are bent, taxpayers are harmed. Second, the long-term harm. Young prosecutors watching these events will either leave the public sector or learn not to pursue sensitive investigations. Experience drains from the system, and the DOJ's capacity to tackle terrorism, organized crime, corporate fraud, and election interference weakens. Blumenthal's legislative instinct to codify protections that prevent White House interference in charging decisions, to create a private right of action for politically motivated prosecutions, to reform grand jury secrecy is not partisan theater. These are structural fixes aimed at preventing exactly the pattern he describes. When he reads in letters from former DOJ officials asking for help, he's anchoring his argument in the professional judgments of people who have lived inside the institution. That should make us listen. There's also an important civics lesson packed into this fight: how oversight is supposed to work. Senators aren't merely performing for the cameras, they're exercising a constitutional duty. Oversight hearings are where democracy tests whether rules are being followed. If those hearings are met with evasions, the remedy isn't resignation, it's stronger oversight: subpoenas, inspector general investigations, special counsels where warranted, and legislation that limits the ability of political actors to micromanage prosecutions. And let's talk about remedies beyond the procedural. First, transparency. The DOJ should show, whenever possible, the legal basis for decisions to open or close investigations. Where secrecy is legally required, independent watchdogs need full access, and the public needs clear explanations. Second, institutional protections. Career prosecutors should be protected from sudden reassignments or firings for exercising prosecutorial independence, and there should be clear channels and legal protections for DOJ whistleblowers. Third, criminal justice should be insulated from PR-driven directives. That can mean new rules about public comments by the White House about pending investigations and penalties when officials cross lines into prohibited influence. There's also a cultural fix that matters, restoring a sense of professional identity inside the DOJ, where impartiality is prized above political loyalty. That's not easy. Culture shifts slowly, but it happens when leaders consistently reward independence and when Congress, the press, and civic actors refuse to normalize politicized prosecutions. That's why hearings like this matter. They keep pressure on leadership and remind the public that independence is a public good worth defending. Finally, what should ordinary people do with this moment? First, treat this as more than a political spectacle. Read beyond sound bites, demand concrete documents, inspector general reports, and follow-ups. Second, use the levers you have. Call and email your representatives, push for substantive oversight rather than partisan spin, and support reforms that strengthen institutional independence. Third, support journalism and watchdog organizations that do the painstaking work of uncovering patterns. They are the people who turn individual anecdotes into systemic proof. This hearing shows both the danger and the remedy. The danger is clear. A justice system that becomes a partisan tool serves power, not the public. The remedy is equally clear, if harder. Insist on transparency, pass targeted reforms that constrain political interference, protect career prosecutors, and keep pressure on leaders who try to normalize evasions. Democracy is not self-maintaining. It requires citizens who care enough to act.